The airport medic clipped a pulse oximeter onto my 4-year-old son's finger. The number settled at 91, and the calm in her face disappeared. "Mrs. Ellison, he cannot fly. His breathing is too fast. His fever is over 104, and he needs an ambulance now." Milo sagged against my husband's chest. 20 minutes earlier, Trent had insisted he was only tired. Now boarding had begun for Blue Haven Flight 284 to San Diego, and a medical responder stood between us and the door. I caught Trent's sleeve. "Cancel the trip. Come with us." At the priority lane, Alyssa Crane waited beside 2 silver suitcases. The launch documents called her an outside brand consultant. A hotel alert on Trent's phone showed that she had been added as the guest in his executive suite. "You are boarding with the woman you are sleeping with, while your son is being taken to the emergency room." Trent did not deny it. Milo opened his eyes halfway and called for him, but Trent looked toward the gate display. He said the launch had investors, airport officials, and hundreds of employees waiting. He said I handled doctors better than he did. Then he placed Milo back into my arms, told me I had built my life around being his mother, and walked into the jet bridge with Alyssa. I did not call Blue Haven's chief executive, or order anyone to stop the flight. Milo's breath caught against my neck, and every other fact in that airport became smaller than that sound. Airport EMS took us to Lakeview Children's Hospital, where doctors started oxygen and IV fluids and found early pneumonia. Only after Milo was stable did my phone light up with a message from Diane Lawson, Blue Haven's corporate secretary. Operations reported a potential executive travel conflict. "Do you want governance notified?" Trent believed the airline belonged to trustees, directors, and executives whose names mattered more than mine. He had no idea its controlling vote belonged to me. Before I tell you how my husband learned who controlled the $12 billion airline he chose over our child, I hope you are doing well wherever you are listening from. Stay with me to see what happened next. And please subscribe if you believe a child should never have to become an emergency before a parent listens. 6 weeks earlier, silence still felt like the safest thing I could give my family. On an ordinary Saturday morning, Trent stood at the stove shaping pancake batter into dinosaurs, while Milo sat at the kitchen island arranging wooden blocks by size. Pancakes were supposed to be followed by a tower tall enough for Milo to knock down while Trent pretended to be shocked. That morning, Trent checked his phone between every pancake. By the time Milo finished eating, Trent was fastening his watch. "I have to stop by the office," he said. The San Diego launch team moved a meeting. Milo looked at the unfinished tower. "After lunch? We'll see, buddy." Milo nodded and returned the blocks to their basket. He did not complain. Trent kissed his hair and praised him for being easy. I watched our son smile, as though disappointment were something he had successfully hidden. At the time, I mistook that for maturity. My work happened mostly from the study upstairs. I advised nonprofit boards, reviewed governance policies, and handled matters connected to Kendall Aviation Holdings. Trent called it my trust paperwork. I never corrected him. Kendall Aviation Holdings controlled 54% of Blue Haven's voting power. Blue Haven's approximate enterprise value was $12.2 billion, but that number was not cash I could spend. An independent board ran the company every day. My authority concerned voting control and board appointments, responsibilities I had deliberately kept outside my marriage. When Trent applied to Blue Haven in 2017, before I controlled the voting block, I signed a memorandum promising not to contact anyone involved in his recruitment. After my mother died in 2020, and directing authority passed to me through the family trust, the independent directors converted that promise into a standing recusal. I received no confidential information about Trent's salary, promotions, reviews, or discipline. Trent knew my family owned a large aviation holding. He believed trustees and directors held the real power. I allowed that belief to survive because I thought his pride needed protecting, and our marriage needed one place where Blue Haven did not enter the room. My mother had been respected for stopping flights over the smallest safety concern. At home, every childhood need had been told to wait until after the meeting or crisis. When Milo was born, I promised he would never compete with an airline for my attention. I withdrew from routine corporate life and convinced myself that becoming less visible was the same as becoming more present. Alyssa Crane's name first appeared in a governance packet connected to the San Diego launch. Her company was one of 3 finalists for a 3-year branding contract, and her presentation was strong. Trent praised her for understanding pressure, without making everything personal. I wondered whether it was praise for her or criticism of me. Then his phone began staying face down. A hotel charge appeared on our household statement and was later corrected as a launch planning expense. He missed Milo's preschool family afternoon after promising to attend. When I asked where he had been, he showed me a calendar full of meetings. Each explanation was possible. I wanted proof before I accused the father of my child of betraying us, so I waited. Milo began waiting too. Whenever Trent canceled a game or took a call during dinner, our son said, "I'm okay," before anyone asked. Trent praised him for not making a scene. I noticed the habit but told myself Milo was becoming adaptable. On Thursday evening, the night before the inaugural flight, Milo developed a fever of 100.7. He remained alert, drank water, and argued about which pajamas he wanted, but I called the pediatric nurse line. The nurse advised fluids, an age-appropriate fever reducer, and close monitoring. She told me to seek urgent help if his breathing changed, if he became unusually sleepy, if he stopped drinking, or if the fever rose sharply. Trent stood in the doorway while I wrote everything down. "We are not canceling an 11-month launch over a mild fever," he said. "If he is worse in the morning, you and Milo can stay home. You could stay too. I am the executive responsible for the route." Milo looked between us, still awake enough to follow the tension. I lowered my voice and said we would decide in the morning. After he fell asleep, I checked the travel file Trent had left open on the kitchen counter. Alyssa was listed on the same flight and hotel block. Trent said the entire launch team was staying there, which was true. But Alyssa had no separate room assignment, while Trent's reservation had been changed to a larger executive suite. It was suspicious, not conclusive. Again, I promised myself I would confront him after the launch, when Milo was well, and I had enough facts that Trent could not dismiss me as emotional. At 4:40 the next morning, I woke to find Milo standing beside my bed. His small body was shivering, even though heat rolled off his skin when I pulled him close. He pressed his face against my shoulder and whispered, "I can be quiet on the plane." That was when I understood our son had already learned the lesson I had spent years teaching myself. Pain was acceptable only when it did not interrupt anyone else's plans. At 5 in the morning, Milo's fever had fallen to 101 after medicine. He drank water, named his favorite dinosaur, and complained when I changed him into clean clothes. Those ordinary answers calmed me more than they should have. I counted his breaths. They were faster than usual, but he could stand, answer questions, and drink. None of the emergency signs the nurse had listed were present yet. "We should stay home," I told Trent. He was nodding his tie. "If Milo should stay, then stay with him." I said we should stay. "The San Diego airport chairman is meeting us at the gate. Investors are flying in. If I miss the inaugural launch, everyone will know why I was never considered reliable enough for the COO shortlist. Our son has a fever. A mild fever that responded to medication. You called a nurse. You know what to watch for." The words were reasonable enough to borrow. That was the danger of them. I packed medicine, a thermometer, water, crackers, and the pediatrician's number. I told myself we could turn around if Milo worsened. I told myself that canceling before an emergency appeared would prove Trent right about me always expecting the worst. Milo walked to the car without help. During the drive, Trent took 3 calls. The last was with Alyssa. He lowered his voice when he told her he would handle the hotel issue after boarding. "What hotel issue?" I asked. "A vendor booking problem." From the back seat, Milo asked whether San Diego had sharks. Trent answered, but Milo did not ask another question. He rested his head against the car seat and closed his eyes. At the terminal, He did not pull his suitcase. He leaned against me while Trent checked the luggage. By the time we reached security, Milo had stopped talking. I crouched beside him. "Tell me what hurts." "Nothing." His answer came too quickly. I touched his forehead and felt that the heat had returned. "We are leaving," I said. Trent glanced at the line. "We are already through check-in. Give him another dose when it is time. He is getting worse." "He is tired because we woke him early." Milo opened his eyes. "I can walk." He took 2 steps and stumbled into me. That should have ended the argument. Instead, I reached for the thermometer, still searching for permission to stop everything. It read 103.6. "Take him to the family restroom. Cool him down and meet me at the gate," Trent said. "You are still talking as if we are boarding." "We have not heard a medical professional say he cannot." The statement followed me through the terminal. Trent had reduced fatherhood to a technical threshold. Until someone with a badge ordered him to choose his son, he believed he had not made a choice. I carried Milo the final stretch while Trent walked ahead, answering another call. Alyssa waited near the priority lane with launch credentials, a Blue Haven-issued business class boarding pass, and 2 silver suitcases. When she saw Trent, relief crossed her face. Her hand touched his forearm and stayed there too long to be accidental. Then she noticed Milo. "Is he all right?" "No," I said. Trent took Milo while I reached for water. His phone lit up in his free hand. The updated hotel confirmation listed Alyssa Crane as the authorized additional guest in Trent Ellison's executive suite. I read it twice because 12 years of marriage resisted becoming a single line on a screen. "Tell me, that is a mistake." Trent locked the phone. "Not here." "Tell me she is not staying in your suite." The launch hotel consolidated rooms. Her room disappeared, and she became your authorized guest. "We will discuss this after San Diego." "There is no after San Diego unless you answer me now." He did not deny the affair. He only looked angry that certainty had arrived at an inconvenient time. Milo made a soft sound. His knees buckled when Trent tried to set him down. I caught him before he hit the carpet. A gate agent called airport medical assistance. Alyssa stepped back as the responders arrived with a wheelchair and a medical bag. One checked Milo's temperature while another clipped a pulse oximeter to his finger. I explained the fever, the nurse line call, the medicine, and the drive. The medic watched the monitor settle. "His oxygen saturation is 91. His temperature is 104.3. He is breathing too fast and is not alert enough to travel. He cannot fly. He needs emergency care now." The boarding announcement began behind us. Trent heard every word. I caught his sleeve. "Come with us." He looked at Milo, then at the gate display. Boarding had opened for Blue Haven's inaugural flight to San Diego. Alyssa stood near the priority line with her luggage. "The route launch cannot happen without me," Trent said. "Your son is being taken to the hospital. He will have doctors. You know his history. You can answer their questions. Milo is asking for you." Our son opened his eyes halfway. "Dad, come too." For a moment, I saw the father Trent had once been. When Milo had an ear infection at 2, Trent had sat on the bathroom floor with him until dawn. He had once understood that presence mattered even when it could not cure anything. Alyssa said his name quietly. She did not smile. She looked as though she wanted him to choose, without making her witness what the choice meant. Trent returned Milo to my arms. "You built your whole life around being his mother," he said. "So be his mother." He picked up his carry-on and entered the jet bridge. Alyssa hesitated, then followed. No one applauded or confronted them. The gate employees did not know who I was. Milo's breathing had grown shallow against my neck, and every part of my life beyond his body disappeared. A senior operations manager approached as the responders secured Milo in the wheelchair. "Mrs. Ellison, should I notify corporate governance?" "Not yet. My son comes first." The responders moved us through a secure exit to the ambulance bay. I climbed inside beside Milo while a paramedic placed oxygen beneath his nose. As the terminal doors closed behind us, I understood that discovering another woman was not the deepest betrayal. Trent had been given one final chance to believe his child, and had chosen a boarding call instead. At Lakeview Children's Hospital, the emergency team checked Milo's breathing, started an IV, drew blood, swabbed him for respiratory viruses, and sent him for chest imaging. I repeated the timeline until every hour felt carved into me. The nurse line call, the lowered fever, the drive, the silence in the car, the stumble at security, the number on the monitor. Every moment showed me how long I had waited for someone else to confirm what I had already feared. Dr. Priya Nand returned with the first results. He has influenza with early pneumonia and significant dehydration. We are admitting him, but he is responding to oxygen and fluids. I expect him to recover. Relief weakened my knees. I sat beside Milo's bed and pressed my forehead to his hand. When he woke, his eyes were glassy, but focused. I tried not to cough, he whispered. You never have to hide when something hurts. Why didn't Dad believe me? There was no answer that could protect him without becoming another lie. He should have, I said. And I should have stopped the trip sooner. Being sick is not being bad, Milo. You did nothing wrong. His fingers tightened around mine before sleep took him again. My phone vibrated on the chair beside me. The message was from Diane Lawson. Operations had reported a potential executive travel conflict. The attached expense record classified Alyssa's ticket as essential route launch travel authorized by Trent Ellison. I had reviewed Alyssa's approved consulting scope myself. She had never been authorized as essential. Milo's fever did not break that first night. It fell by degrees, then climbed again, leaving his hair damp against the pillow and his lips dry, despite the fluids running into his arm. The oxygen beneath his nose stayed in place, while the monitor beside him marked every breath I had nearly convinced myself was ordinary. Dr. Priyanand returned after midnight and listened to his lungs again. She told me the medication was working, but recovery would not happen in a straight line. The pneumonia had been caught early. His oxygen level was improving. He was still dehydrated, exhausted, and too young for anyone to promise how quickly his body would regain its strength. You did the right thing by bringing him in, she said. The words should have comforted me. Instead, they brought back the drive to the airport, every mile during which I had watched Milo grow quieter while Trent kept talking about the launch. I wrote the timeline in a notebook because the doctors needed exact times: the fever Thursday evening, the nurse line call, the medicine before dawn, the reading in our bedroom, the drive, the stumble at security, the number on the gate medic's monitor. Seeing it on paper stripped away every excuse I had used. Milo had not become critically ill at home. His condition had changed quickly at the airport, just as the nurse had warned it might. I had not ignored an obvious emergency for hours, but I had kept looking at Trent before trusting what I saw. That truth hurt, but I refused to turn it into a punishment that belonged only to me. Trent had heard the same warning at the gate. He had watched Milo struggle to stay awake. A medical professional had told him our son needed an ambulance, and he had still boarded the flight. My hesitation did not erase his choice. I slept in bursts with one hand around Milo's fingers. Each time I woke, I checked the monitor before I remembered where I was. Near sunrise, a nurse reduced his oxygen support. She did not remove it completely, but the smaller flow felt like the first piece of good news I could hold without fear. Milo woke long enough to drink a few sips of water. When I praised him, he searched my face as though he needed to know whether drinking had been enough to keep me calm. You don't have to make me feel better, I told him. You just have to tell me how you feel. Tired? Then you can be tired. He closed his eyes again, and I sat beside him while guilt and relief moved through me in turns. Diane Lawson called shortly after 9. She used the secure governance line, not my personal number. That alone told me the conversation would not remain inside my marriage. I received a routine operational referral from O'Hare, she said. I want to be careful about what I share and what I ask. Go ahead. The Gate medical event created an incident entry. It contains no diagnosis and no hospital information. During the linked review, Travel Compliance checked an executive travel exception that was still active for the San Diego launch. I looked at Milo before answering. His breathing was quieter now, but the oxygen line remained beneath his nose. What did they find? Alyssa Crane was coded as an essential consultant. Her approved vendor scope does not appear to support that classification. Diane did not know about the affair. To her, Alyssa was still the owner of a legitimate branding firm, and Trent was still an executive who had approved an unusual travel benefit. Was her ticket paid through the launch budget? Yes, business class. The hotel exception also placed her in an executive suite outside the terms approved by procurement. I closed my eyes. The hotel confirmation I had seen at the gate had not been a private reservation Trent planned to hide from Blue Haven. He had placed it inside the company's system and given it a business purpose. Diane continued carefully. Because you are the controlling shareholder and the executive involved is your husband, I need to ask whether a family conflict may exist. I am not asking for conclusions. I am asking whether existing records should be preserved. I had enough voting power to change Blue Haven's board. I did not have the right to rewrite one expense file because my husband had humiliated me. Preserve what already exists, I said. Reservations, expense records, emails, vendor documents, and launch materials. No one alters anything. Do you want Trent suspended? No. Alyssa's contract paused? Not on my instruction. Diane waited. Route the matter to independent compliance, I said. No termination, suspension, or conclusion based on this call. Understood. I also need your conflict disclosure for the record. I looked at the wedding ring still on my hand. Trent Ellison is my husband. At the gate, I saw a hotel confirmation naming Alyssa Crane as the additional guest in his suite. I confronted him about a sexual relationship. He did not deny it. I am disclosing that because it affects my judgment. I am not asking Blue Haven to treat the affair itself as a corporate violation. Diane's voice remained even. I will record only what you stated. I will also issue a preservation notice to the relevant record custodians today. It will preserve existing material without accusing anyone or stopping normal work. There was a time when I might have asked her to handle everything quietly. I might have called one director I trusted and tried to keep Milo's name out of every document by making the problem disappear. Instead, I chose the narrowest action available. Preserve the truth. Step away from deciding what it meant. Kendall Aviation Holdings controlled 54% of Blue Haven's voting power. Through the family trust, I directed that voting block and held the authority to appoint a majority of the board. That made me Blue Haven's controlling owner. It did not make the airline my private possession. I could not take company money because I wanted it. I could not ground a flight to punish someone. I could not fire an executive because he had betrayed me as a husband. The board governed the company. Management ran daily operations, and every power I held carried obligations to employees, investors, vendors, and passengers who had never heard Milo's name. For years, I had treated that distance as protection. Now it was the only thing keeping my anger from becoming another abuse of authority. Trent finally texted shortly before noon. Is Milo stable? I stared at the question. No apology, no explanation, no missed calls from the plane. Before I answered, another message appeared. Communications wants to know whether the launch team should issue a statement about a family medical issue. We need to control speculation. I read the words twice. Our son was receiving oxygen, and Trent was worried about message control. Milo is hospitalized and responding to treatment, I wrote. No public statement may identify him or disclose any medical information. Do not use our child to explain your decision to board. Trent did not reply. An hour later, Blue Haven posted official photographs from San Diego. I had followed the corporate account for years, without thinking about it. The first image showed Trent at a ribbon cutting beside airport officials. Alyssa stood close enough for their shoulders to touch. Behind them, the campaign wall carried the launch slogan, "Bringing people closer." Trent was smiling. The picture did not show the medic telling him Milo could not fly. It did not show our son calling for him. It did not show the oxygen line, the IV, or the chair where I had slept with my shoes still on. It showed a successful executive standing beneath a promise about connection. I turned the phone face down before Milo woke. By Saturday morning, his fever had started to fall more steadily. The oxygen was removed for short periods while the nurses watched his numbers. Dr. Priya warned me that he would remain weak and could still need support if his breathing worsened. She expected another night in the hospital. Milo accepted a few spoonfuls of applesauce, then pushed the tray away. "When is Dad coming?" The question was quiet enough that I almost pretended not to hear it. "He is still away." "On the plane?" "He is in San Diego." Milo turned his face toward the window. "I'm tired." I did not tell him Trent had chosen a launch photo over his hospital room. I did not explain affairs, procurement rules, or why adults sometimes built careful stories around selfish decisions. I adjusted his blanket and let him rest. Diane sent me Alyssa's original consulting scope that afternoon. The work was real. Her firm had been approved to help prepare launch messaging, review campaign materials, and advise the local media team. She had not invented a business to follow Trent across the country. But she had not been designated an essential traveler. Business class airfare was not included. An executive suite was not included. No approved term allowed Trent to treat her as his personal guest and charge Blue Haven for the privilege. The truth was more complicated than a fake consultant and more damaging than a simple affair. Trent had taken legitimate work and stretched it until it could hide what he wanted. On Sunday morning, Milo managed several hours without oxygen. I was helping him choose between 2 picture books when Diane's name appeared again. Her message contained no opinion, only a document and the time it had entered the system. A route launch budget amendment had been submitted from Trent's account after Milo was admitted to the hospital. I opened it while Milo traced a dinosaur with one finger. Alyssa's duties had been expanded to include on-site executive coordination, stakeholder meetings, and essential travel support. The amendment made her airfare, hotel access, and proximity to Trent appear necessary. The effective date had been entered as the day before the flight. Trent had not simply boarded while our son was being taken to the hospital. After he knew the records were being preserved, he had begun changing the story they told. Milo came home Sunday afternoon after 2 nights in the hospital. His fever had stayed down, his oxygen level remained stable without support, and Dr. Priya believed he could recover at home if I watched his breathing, kept him hydrated, and brought him back immediately if he became unusually sleepy or started struggling for air. He could walk only a few steps before asking me to carry him. A nurse helped settle him into a wheelchair while another reviewed the medication schedule. Trent was not there. By Monday morning, Milo was still sleeping more than usual. Trent had sent 3 messages since Sunday night. The first asked whether Milo had been discharged. The second said his return flight landed Monday afternoon. The third asked whether I had spoken to Diane Lawson again. I answered only the question about our son. Milo is home. He is weak and needs rest. When I had carried him upstairs on Sunday, he woke as I pulled the blanket over him. "Is Dad home?" "Not yet." "Will he come see me?" I could not promise what another adult would choose. "He knows you are home." Milo accepted that answer with a small nod and closed his eyes. The ease of it frightened me. He had already started asking for less. Trent arrived shortly after 4, carrying a gift bag from the airport. He set his suitcase inside the front door and looked around as though he had entered a house where he no longer knew the rules. "How is he?" "Sleeping." I brought him something. Inside the bag was a stuffed blue whale wearing a San Diego cap. It was the kind of gift bought after security, chosen quickly enough to prove someone had remembered. Trent placed it on the kitchen counter. I should have handled the gate differently. I waited. My tone was wrong, he said. I was under pressure, and I should not have spoken to you that way. You should not have boarded. His jaw tightened. Milo had medical responders around him. You were going with him. My presence would not have changed the treatment. It would have changed what he believed about his father. I believed he was in competent hands. He was calling for you. Trent looked toward the stairs. His face changed for a second, but not enough to become an apology. The launch involved investors, airport officials, and hundreds of employees. If I had walked away at the gate, I would have damaged a route that took almost a year to build. You walked away from your son. I made a professional decision in a crisis. You made a personal decision and hid it inside your job. The room went quiet. Trent removed his coat and folded it over the back of a chair, taking time with the sleeves. Alyssa and I became close during the launch, he said. It crossed a line. How long? Several months. Did the marriage become empty before or after you started sleeping with her? He flinched. We have not been a real couple for years, Meredith. We manage a house. We manage Milo. You disappeared into motherhood and trust meetings you never explain. I stopped explaining because you stopped asking. You always said you were not involved in operations. I am not involved in daily operations. That is not the same thing. No, it is not. He watched me, perhaps waiting for more. I gave him nothing. Trent leaned both hands on the kitchen island. Whatever happened between Alyssa and me does not make her work fraudulent. Her firm performed legitimate services. I know. His expression shifted. Then you understand this can be corrected quietly. He explained the solution as if he were presenting a route adjustment. He would reimburse the business class upgrade and any hotel cost outside Alyssa's approved scope. Alyssa's company could withdraw from the procurement process. He and I could separate privately, tell Milo only what was appropriate, and keep Blue Haven out of a marriage it had no right to examine. Then he said what he had returned home to ask. Tell Diane to narrow the preservation review to an expense correction. I stared at him. You amended Alyssa's work scope after Milo entered the hospital. It was incomplete. You backdated it. The work was already happening. The document caught up with reality. The document changed after the preservation notice reached you. I knew records were being preserved. I did not think a scope clarification was prohibited. The notice covered the existing record. You changed the history after it arrived. He straightened. So this is what you want? You want to use your family's influence because I had an affair? No. I want the original records preserved because you changed them after our son was taken to the hospital. I clarified them. You made private benefits look necessary. His voice dropped. Do you understand what a formal investigation would do to Milo? His father's name and employment records? Questions about the airport? Questions about why I boarded? You say you want to protect him, but you are about to turn the worst day of his life into a corporate case. That argument reached the place in me he intended it to reach. I imagined Milo's name repeated in conference rooms. I imagined employees whispering about the sick child an executive had left behind. I imagined a future in which he searched his father's name and found our family reduced to a scandal. My concern had never been Trent's title. It was Milo's privacy. I will ask whether the review can remain limited, I said. That is not a promise that it will close. Trent exhaled, and for the first time since he came home, some of the tension left his shoulders. He believed I had begun protecting him again. I called Diane from the study. After checking that Milo was still asleep, I told her I wanted to understand whether reimbursement and a corrected vendor classification could resolve the matter without a wider inquiry. Her answer was immediate. No. Explain why. Once the travel records were preserved and you disclosed a marital conflict, the matter stopped being something either spouse could privately contain. Compliance must determine whether the classification was inaccurate when submitted, whether anyone was asked to change supporting records, and whether the amendment was created after preservation became foreseeable. I do not want Milo's medical information involved. It will not be. The review needs only the operational fact that a gate incident occurred and that executive travel continued. No diagnosis, treatment record, or hospital detail is necessary. What if I withdraw my concern? You cannot withdraw an existing record from the company's duty to review it. The line stayed silent for a moment. Meredith, if you order us to stop because the executive is your husband, that is also shareholder interference. The truth settled without drama. I could not use my authority to punish Trent, and I could not use it to protect him. Then proceed under the policy, I said. By Tuesday morning, compliance had followed Friday's preservation notice with individual instructions to every relevant executive, vendor contact, and compliance employee. Trent entered my study without knocking, holding his phone. You froze my files. I requested preservation. I did not freeze your files. You triggered a disciplinary process. I triggered preservation after an unsupported travel exception appeared beside the name of the woman sharing your suite. You barely participate in Blue Haven, and suddenly trustees are moving because your marriage is damaged. There are no trustees directing this review. Your family always finds another layer of people to speak for you. He still did not understand who controlled Kendall Aviation Holdings. He thought I was a protected beneficiary, with influential relatives and attorneys willing to intervene. For years, that misunderstanding had allowed him to feel like the only person in our marriage whose authority came from work. I did not correct him. This process is independent of me, I said. Then you will not object when I make sure it stays that way. He left before I understood what he meant. On Wednesday afternoon, Diane called to inform me that Trent had filed a formal retaliation complaint under Blue Haven's board conflict and retaliation policy. He alleged that I had used family influence after discovering his affair. He stated that Alyssa had a legitimate business purpose, that her travel had supported the launch, and that I had never participated in Blue Haven's management until our marital conflict began. He requested protection from shareholder interference and a fully independent investigation. Every sentence was designed around facts that were incomplete rather than invented. I was the betrayed spouse. My instruction had triggered preservation. I was also the person who controlled Blue Haven's voting bloc, even if Trent did not yet understand that. The appearance of conflict was real. I will cooperate with every restriction, I told Diane. That will include no access to investigation documents, witness interviews, or evidence summaries. I understand. The disinterested directors are meeting tomorrow. That evening, Trent moved into the guest room. We did not discuss it. Milo was awake long enough to receive the stuffed whale, which he placed beside his pillow without asking where it came from. On Thursday, the board's disinterested directors approved a written resolution, creating a special committee chaired by Judith Carver, an independent director with no relationship to Kendall Holdings or my family. The committee retained outside ethics counsel and received authority to investigate, conduct a hearing, make final findings, and decide Trent's employment status under his executive agreement. My access to the investigation was formally restricted. Trent remained employed while the review continued, but he temporarily lost authority over vendor selection, procurement approvals, and executive travel exceptions. He had asked for independence and received it. I had lost access to the process my instruction had begun. Trent believed that meant he had neutralized whatever power he imagined I possessed. Judith called me after the resolution was entered. Her voice was calm, almost clinical. Your husband asked for an independent investigation, she said. He may not understand that independence applies to his records too. Judith's warning stayed with me after the call ended. Trent had demanded an independent investigation because he believed independence would protect him from my family. He still imagined my connection to Blue Haven as a distant inheritance guarded by trustees, attorneys, and older relatives whose names mattered more than mine. Trent had met me when I was already connected to Kendall Aviation Holdings. He knew my family controlled a company whose decisions affected thousands of employees, and he saw the governance packets that arrived at our house. What he never understood was the difference between not running daily operations and having no authority at all. I had helped create that misunderstanding. When I said I was not involved in operations, I meant I did not schedule flights, manage crews, negotiate airport contracts, or supervise executives. Trent heard that I had no real power, and the conclusion made him comfortable, so I let it stand. The conflict documents he ignored were the reason his career could truly be his own. I had stayed out of his 2017 recruitment, and after control passed to me in 2020, the board's standing recusal kept me away from his compensation, reviews, promotions, and discipline. Whenever his name appeared on an agenda, I left before the file was opened. I had mistaken his lack of curiosity for trust. Now I understood that he had simply decided my work could not matter as much as his. My mother had taught me how easily importance could become an excuse. When I was 11, a maintenance reading on one aircraft came back slightly outside its normal range. The plane had not left the gate, and no passenger was in danger, but my mother still halted the departure until engineers could inspect the system. That same week, she missed my school recital. I waited backstage in a blue dress while other children found their parents in the audience. She called afterward and said disappointment was something we could repair later. The maintenance reading, she explained, could not wait. I carried that lesson into adulthood without realizing it. Systems deserved immediate attention. Children were expected to survive delay. When Milo was born, I tried to reverse the rule. I stepped away from regular corporate life and arranged my work around his meals, preschool pickups, and bedtime. I thought that if I never allowed the airline to come first, I could not become my mother. Instead, I made a different mistake. I began treating every conflict as something that could be repaired later. I waited for certainty before confronting Trent, and for proof before trusting my own judgment. I taught myself that silence was patience, and Milo watched me. 3 days after he came home from the hospital, I heard him coughing in the bathroom. The sound stopped as soon as I approached. "Are you all right?" I asked. "I'm fine. You can tell me if your chest hurts." He studied my face before answering. "Do I have to go back to the doctor?" "Only if your body needs help. I don't want Dad mad again." The words left no place for me to hide. Milo had connected his illness with the fight at the airport. He believed pain had caused his father to leave. I called the pediatric social worker at Lakeview that afternoon. She recommended a child therapist experienced with medical stress and family disruption. During our first meeting, the therapist did not ask Milo to explain the affair or the investigation. She watched him play with plastic animals, while I described the airport. "Children his age often connect events by sequence rather than cause," she told me. "He became sick," adults argued, "and his father left. He may believe the first event caused the others. How do I correct that?" "Keep the explanation simple. Adults make their own choices. His symptoms did not control his father. Do not promise the old family structure will return, and do not ask him to protect either parent's feelings." I had spent years promising stability by pretending nothing had changed. Now, honesty was the only form of safety I had left. That Saturday, Trent came downstairs without the suit he wore like armor and sat on the living room floor beside the wooden blocks. Milo stayed near me at first, then carried over 2 pieces and placed them in front of his father. Trent began building the same tall tower they used to make on Saturday mornings. His hands were careful, and his voice softened. For several minutes, I saw the father who had once slept on a bathroom floor beside a feverish toddler because Milo cried whenever he stood up. Milo added a red block near the top. "Why did you go on the plane?" Trent's hand stopped. "The launch was very important. A lot of people needed me there. I needed you. I knew the doctors would help you." "That wasn't my question," Milo said. He was too young to understand how completely he had exposed the weakness in Trent's answer. Trent looked at me, but I did not rescue him. "I thought your mom could take care of you," he said. Milo knocked the tower over. The blocks scattered across the rug, and this time, Trent did not pretend to be surprised. Milo climbed onto the couch beside me and asked for water. After he fell asleep, Trent and I sat in the kitchen. He said he would reimburse the airfare and hotel costs connected to Alyssa. He would submit a full conflict disclosure and would not contact Renee Foster or anyone responsible for travel records. He also agreed that we should separate while Milo recovered. For the first time since the airport, he did not call the review a family attack. "I don't want him to think he was unimportant," Trent said. The sentence sounded like remorse, or close enough that part of me wanted to believe it could become remorse. "Then stop explaining why the launch mattered," I said. "Tell him you were wrong to leave." Trent lowered his eyes. "I am trying to keep one mistake from destroying everything." The affair was not one mistake. Boarding was not an accident. Changing the scope afterward was another choice. He did not argue. That silence gave me a brief, dangerous hope that he might finally stop trying to control the story. We agreed he would remain in the guest room until temporary living arrangements were settled. We would speak about Milo in writing whenever possible and keep the investigation out of the house. I did not forgive him, and I did not consider reconciliation. I only believed the professional issue might end with reimbursement, disclosure, and a narrow finding. 2 days later, Judith called. Because of the recusal, she could not tell me who had been interviewed or what any witness had said. She could not identify documents, dates, or disputed descriptions. Her update was limited to process. "The scope has expanded," she said. "Beyond the travel classification?" "Yes." "Why?" "The committee is reviewing possible conduct that occurred after the preservation notice." I thought of Trent sitting at Senunine, promising not to contact anyone handling records. I thought of the softness in his voice when he said he did not want Milo to feel unimportant. Judith continued before I could ask another question. "The committee is no longer reviewing only what happened before the flight. Something happened after the records were preserved." She could tell me nothing more. I forwarded every text and email Trent had sent about company records to outside ethics counsel. Then I wrote to him that I would no longer discuss Blue Haven, Alyssa's contract, or the investigation with him privately. The airport had ended our marriage. Whatever Trent had done afterward might decide whether his career survived it. Being excluded from the investigation was the first proof that my recusal meant more than a promise written for appearances. The process notices told me only that records were secure, interviews were underway, and possible post-preservation conduct was being reviewed. They did not identify witnesses, documents, quotations, or timestamps. I was barred from contacting witnesses, requesting records, or discussing the case with Trent. I had spent years refusing to enter rooms where his career was discussed. Now the door was closed for a different reason, and I hated how badly I wanted to know what was behind it. Independence restrained not only the accused, but also the controlling owner most desperate for answers. Once Milo's doctor confirmed that his lungs were healing, and he no longer needed daily medical monitoring, I met with an Illinois family attorney. I brought our premarital agreement, the deed to the house, account statements, and the documents establishing my interest in the Kendall family trust. She read quietly, before explaining what the agreement did and did not protect. The family trust, the Blue Haven voting block, and the assets traceable to my inheritance remained separate property. The home Trent and I had purchased together, our ordinary marital accounts, and the decisions concerning Milo would be handled separately. My control of the airline did not give me greater parental rights, and Trent's employment investigation did not automatically remove his right to be part of Milo's life. "I do not want the company used as leverage in the divorce," I said. "Then keep the tracks separate," she replied. "Do not condition money, housing, or parenting time on anything he says in the corporate matter." That was what I wanted, but hearing it stated so plainly showed me how easily anger could make one boundary infect another. I authorized her to prepare and file the dissolution petition in Cook County now that Milo's immediate medical condition had stabilized. It was not a final divorce, and no court had divided property or issued a parenting judgment. It was only the formal acknowledgement of a decision I had already made. Trent did not argue when my attorney proposed immediate living arrangements. He moved into a furnished apartment near Blue Haven's offices, close enough to attend Milo's medical appointments and scheduled visits. Under a temporary written agreement, our household bills continued from the same marital account. Milo's medical costs remained covered, and neither of us could make major financial changes without written notice. I did not throw Trent out without resources. I did not threaten to keep Milo from him if he challenged the ethics process. The fairness of those arrangements did not mean I wanted him back. It meant I refused to become careless, simply because he had been cruel. Milo returned to preschool in short mornings. On the first day, I stayed in the parking lot for 20 minutes, after the classroom door closed, watching the windows as if I could see whether he was breathing correctly from across the building. When I picked him up, his teacher said he had participated but tired quickly. Before I could ask how he felt, Milo announced that he was fine. He watched my face while he said it. The cough he had tried to hide at home had not frightened me, because of what it meant medically. Dr. Priya had warned that a lingering cough was normal. What frightened me was how naturally Milo had begun editing his body for the comfort of adults. His therapist introduced 3 circles on a sheet of paper. One was labeled small hurt, one medium hurt, and one big hurt. She showed him pictures of a scratch, a stomachache, a fever, sadness, and fear. Milo placed almost everything in the largest circle. "Why does the little cough go there?" she asked. "Because if it is little, people are busy." She did not correct him immediately. She asked what might happen if a little hurt was ignored. "It gets big." "And when should adults listen?" Milo looked at me before answering. "When it gets big." I felt the lesson I had taught without ever saying it aloud. Trent had praised Milo for being easy. I had praised him for being brave. Neither of us had explained that courage did not require silence. "Adults need to know when it is still small," I told him. "You do not have to wait until it becomes an emergency." He moved the picture of the cough into the smallest circle, though he did not look convinced. A week later, Trent's attorney sent a proposal to mine. It did not ask me to end the investigation, at least not directly. Trent offered to resign from procurement oversight, reimburse every disputed travel expense, submit a conflict disclosure concerning Alyssa, and withdraw any influence over her company's bid. In return, he wanted the ownership structure of Kendall Aviation Holdings kept outside the employment record. There was one additional condition. I had to sign a statement saying I did not believe Blue Haven funds had been intentionally misused. I read the sentence several times. It was carefully written. It did not ask me to say every record was accurate. It asked me to describe my belief, something private enough to sound harmless and powerful enough to be quoted later. I called my attorney. "I cannot say whether the misuse was intentional. I have not seen the evidence. That is exactly why you cannot sign it." He is offering repayment and separation from procurement. He is also asking the controlling shareholder and his wife to certify his state of mind while an independent committee is examining it. For several hours, I still considered accepting the privacy terms. I imagined Blue Haven employees learning that Trent had built his career inside a company controlled by his wife. Every promotion would be questioned, even though I had never touched one. Our marriage would become office gossip. Milo might one day discover that strangers associated his illness with a corporate scandal. Privacy had protected him from enough already. It had protected Trent's pride, my fear of conflict, and the illusion that silence made our family stable. I could not protect Milo by signing a version of events I did not know was true. My attorney forwarded the proposal to outside ethics counsel. She included no accusation, only a statement that I would not negotiate or sign factual representations concerning an active investigation. From that point forward, any settlement involving Blue Haven had to pass through the special committee. Trent called Milo that evening. The conversation began gently. He asked about preschool, the blue whale, and whether Milo had rebuilt the block tower. Milo held the phone with both hands. It fell again. "We can make a stronger one next time," Trent said. For a few minutes, Their voices found an old rhythm. Then Trent asked whether I was in the room. Yes, Milo answered. Trent's tone changed. Tell your mother, I am trying to protect our family while people at work are trying to take my job. I stepped closer. This call is for Milo. I am explaining why I cannot see him as often. You are discussing an adult employment matter in front of a 4-year-old. Milo looked from the screen to me. Are you losing work? Trent hesitated. Some people are making things difficult. I ended the adult discussion before he could turn our son into a messenger. Milo, tell Dad about the picture you made at school. The call continued for another minute, but Milo's attention had changed. After Trent said goodbye, he asked whether his father would still have an apartment if he lost work. I told him grown-ups were responsible for housing and jobs. He did not have to solve either problem. That night, he placed the blue whale beneath his bed, instead of beside his pillow. 2 days later, the special committee issued a formal process notice. The evidence was materially disputed. Trent's retaliation complaint remained active. The committee could not resolve his allegations without examining whether the investigation had been independent from the beginning. That required placing 3 things into the record. My ownership authority, the conflict memorandum I signed before Trent's recruitment in 2017, and the standing recusal adopted after I received the controlling vote in 2020. A closed hearing would be held in early December. Trent and his attorney could challenge the evidence, the committee's authority, and the fairness of the process. I would be permitted to authenticate ownership and conflict documents and answer limited factual questions. I still would not receive witness statements before the hearing. I would not see the committee's confidential deliberations. I would not vote. Diane called after the notice was delivered. Trent's counsel is arguing that you are only a trust beneficiary, she said. They claim unidentified family trustees created this process after you complained. He still believes someone else controls the vote. That misunderstanding is now part of his retaliation claim. I looked through the study window at Milo's empty swing. I had kept my authority outside the marriage because I wanted Trent's career to stand on its own. Now, the privacy I had once considered ethical was being used to argue that the investigation itself had no legitimate foundation. What do you need from me? I asked. To answer his challenge, the committee must put the controlling vote and every limitation on your power into the record. For years, remaining hidden had seemed like the cleanest way to protect everyone. For the first time, I understood that staying hidden might damage the very independence I had created. The hearing notice arrived 7 days before the closed session, almost 2 months after Milo had been carried out of O'Hare. It named the people who would be in the room. Judith Carver would chair the session. 3 independent directors would sit with her. Outside Ethics Counsel would present the record. Diane Lawson would attend as custodian of the governance documents. Trent and his attorney would have the right to challenge the process, question witnesses, and respond to the evidence. My role was narrower. I would authenticate the ownership structure of Kendall Aviation Holdings, explain the conflict memorandum I signed in 2017, confirm the standing recusal adopted in 2020, and answer factual questions. I would not receive witness statements in advance. I would not remain for confidential deliberations. I would not vote. Diane came to the house that afternoon with a folder she did not leave behind. Milo was at preschool, and for the first time since the airport, the silence around me did not feel safe. It felt like a room waiting for someone to tell the truth. You have a choice, she said. You can appear and correct the ownership record while maintaining your recusal, or you can decline. What happens if I decline? Trent may continue arguing that unnamed family trustees created the investigation to punish him. The committee can still proceed, but the false premise will remain part of his challenge. And if I appear? Your authority becomes part of the formal record. So do every restriction you placed on yourself. I looked at the folder between us. The hearing is private. Yes, but privacy is not a permanent guarantee. Litigation, regulatory requests, or later employment proceedings could make portions of the record discoverable. Employees may eventually learn that Trent built his career inside a company controlled by his wife. They will assume I gave him everything. Some may. And Milo becomes the sick child behind the scandal. Only if adults choose to identify him, Blue Haven will not. Diane did not offer reassurance she could not guarantee. That was one reason I trusted her. She reminded me of the limits. I could not privately call directors. I could not ask Judith how she intended to vote. I could not see the evidence before Trent saw it. I could not remain after my factual role ended. You can tell the truth about your authority, Diane said. You cannot decide what the truth costs him. After she left, I sat in the study where I had spent years making myself sound smaller than I was. The shelves held governance binders beside Milo's preschool drawings. One world had never truly been separate from the other. I had only arranged the room, so they appeared not to touch. Trent's message arrived that evening. You hid the most important fact of our marriage. You let me believe I supported this family, while you controlled the company that employed me. Now you are using that secret, because I wanted a life outside your shadow. I read it twice. There was no mention of Milo asking him to come to the hospital. No mention of the suite, the backdated scope, or whatever had expanded the investigation after preservation. His deepest injury was not that our son had been afraid, or that our marriage had ended. It was that the story he told about himself might be incomplete. Trent needed to be the man who had built everything alone. My restraint had allowed him to keep that identity. He had mistaken the space I gave him for evidence that I had nothing worth hiding. I started typing an explanation. I wanted to remind him that I had signed the first conflict memorandum before his interview. I wanted to list every meeting I had left, every compensation file I had refused to see, and every director I had forbidden from discussing him with me. Then, I deleted the message. If 12 years of marriage had not taught him the difference between restraint and weakness, one more explanation would not create accountability. It would only give him another argument to answer. Milo's therapy appointment was the next morning. His therapist placed the 3 circles on the table again. Small hurt, medium hurt, and big hurt. She gave him picture cards. A fever went into big hurt. A scraped knee went into medium. He held the picture of a cough for a long time. "Where does that one go?" she asked. Milo looked at me. "It depends." "On what?" "If somebody is busy." The therapist slid a card showing a sad face toward him. "What about this?" He placed it outside all 3 circles. "Why not in one of them?" "Because sad doesn't stop anything." I felt the answer in my chest. I moved my chair closer but waited until the therapist nodded before speaking. "Your body and your feelings do not have to ask whether adults are busy." Milo traced the edge of the smallest circle. "What if it is little?" "Then we listen while it is little." "What if it makes somebody miss work?" "A hurt does not make adults choose badly. Adults are responsible for what they choose, write, and say." He looked up at me. "Did my fever make Dad lose work?" "No decision has been made about Dad's job." "But he said people were taking it." "Dad is dealing with a grown-up problem at work. Your fever did not create it." "Then what did?" I chose words small enough for him to carry. "Grown-ups have rules too. They are responsible for telling the truth and using work things the right way. Dad's choices belong to Dad." Milo moved the cough into the small circle. The sad face followed it. "So they listen before it gets big?" he asked. "Yes. They should listen when it is still little." He did not smile, but he left both cards inside the circle. That afternoon I called Diane. "I will appear." She did not congratulate me. "I will notify the committee. I will authenticate the ownership documents and the recusal. I will answer factual questions. And then? I leave before deliberation." Diane paused. "That is the correct boundary. It is also the only one I can live with." Outside counsel helped me prepare, but preparation did not mean rehearsing emotion. We reviewed dates. Trent applied in 2017. I signed the original conflict memorandum before his first interview. My mother died in 2020. Directing authority over the 54% voting block passed to me through the family trust. The independent directors then adopted the standing recusal, which I renewed each year. One advisor suggested that I make a stronger entrance, because Trent's retaliation claim relied on portraying me as a passive beneficiary, suddenly interfering in operations. Another recommended a dark suit, a prepared statement, and language emphasizing the value of the airline. I refused. I was not entering a public courtroom for a victory. There would be no photographers, no employees waiting outside, and no dramatic announcement that I owned a $12 billion company. The number did not explain what Trent had done. It only explained why my restraint mattered. I chose a plain navy dress and carried one folder. Inside were the trust certification, the voting control record, the 2017 memorandum, the 2020 resolution, and every annual renewal of my recusal. I prepared one sentence about the boundary between the two matters. The committee would decide Trent's employment. My decision about the marriage was not theirs to make. The hearing took place on the first Monday in December, in Blue Haven's Executive Conference Center. Diane met me in a private corridor and walked beside me without speaking. Through the glass doors, I could see Trent at the long table with his attorney. He looked rested and confident. His attorney was speaking when I entered. Mrs. Ellison is a trust beneficiary with no operational standing. The company's directors were activated only after a private marital dispute. Trent turned toward me. His eyes moved over the folder in my hand, then settled on my face. He smiled, as though my presence proved his argument. Judith waited until everyone was seated. Then she opened the ownership record in front of her. Before we examine retaliation, this committee must correct a factual premise in Mr. Ellison's complaint. Trent's smile widened, because he thought the correction would protect him. Judith did not look at me when she began. Her attention remained on Trent, and the retaliation complaint opened before her. Mr. Ellison's filing repeatedly describes Mrs. Ellison as a beneficiary whose relatives and trustees influenced Blue Haven after a marital dispute. That description is inaccurate. Trent's smile disappeared. This was not a courtroom. There was no judge, jury, audience, or reporter waiting for a dramatic confession. 4 independent directors sat at the long table with outside ethics counsel. Diane Lawson had been called to authenticate governance records. Trent had his attorney beside him and the right to challenge every document presented. The committee could decide only matters connected to his employment and Blue Haven's governance. It could not decide our divorce, divide our property, or determine his future relationship with Milo. Diane opened the first folder. Kendall Aviation Holdings holds shares carrying approximately 54% of Blue Haven's voting power, she said. That is the company's controlling voting block. The shares are held through the Kendall Family Trust. Trent leaned toward his attorney. I know her family has a trust. Diane continued without reacting. Since June 2020, Meredith Kendall Ellison has held directing authority over that voting block. She has the power to appoint a majority of Blue Haven's board, subject to the trust documents and corporate bylaws. His attorney interrupted. Does she manage flight operations, employees, or daily expenditures? No. Blue Haven's board and executive leadership manage daily operations independently. What is the current value of Mrs. Ellison's personal economic interest? That cannot be calculated from enterprise value alone, and it is not the question before this committee. Judith looked at Trent. For context only, Blue Haven's current enterprise value is approximately $12.2 billion. That figure is not Mrs. Ellison's personal cash and does not permit her to use company assets as private property. It does establish that she directs the controlling vote of this airline. Trent turned toward me slowly. For the first time, he understood that the airline had never belonged to a collection of distant relatives who occasionally allowed me into meetings. The trustees administered the structure. The directors governed the company. Executives ran its operations, but the controlling vote belonged to me. You own Blue Haven, he said. I direct the controlling voting interest through Kendall Aviation Holdings. His face tightened. That means yes. It means exactly what Diane explained. He stared at me, as though he were searching our 12 years of marriage for every moment he could now reinterpret. The study door I closed during governance calls. The packets he never opened. The meetings he dismissed as trust paperwork. The times I said I was not involved in operations, and he heard that I had no authority. His disbelief did not become fear. It became anger. How long have you been lying to me? Judith raised a hand. Mr. Ellison, you will have an opportunity to question Mrs. Ellison after the governance record is authenticated. Diane opened a second folder. In 2017, before Mr. Ellison applied to Blue Haven, Mrs. Ellison was a beneficiary of the Kendall Family Trust and a non-voting observer in certain holding company matters. She did not yet direct the controlling vote. She placed a signed memorandum on the display. Before Mr. Ellison's first interview, Mrs. Ellison disclosed the family relationship and signed a non-involvement memorandum. It prohibited her from contacting recruiters, discussing his candidacy with directors, or receiving information about the selection process. Trent's attorney studied the document. Was this legally necessary? It was a voluntary conflict safeguard, requested by Mrs. Ellison, and accepted by independent directors. Diane displayed the recruitment log. My name did not appear in a single call, email, recommendation, or interview note. Then she opened the 2020 resolution. When directing authority passed to Mrs. Ellison after her mother's death, the independent directors adopted a formal standing recusal. It excluded her from all matters involving Mr. Ellison's compensation, promotion, performance review, discipline, and termination. Annual renewals followed. My signature appeared at the bottom of each one. Diane also presented meeting records, showing when Trent's name entered an agenda. I left before discussion began. Independent directors approved his promotions. Independent compensation specialists reviewed his salary. I had never contacted a supervisor about his performance or cast a vote affecting his career. The documents did not show that I had secretly built Trent's success. They showed how carefully I had stayed away from it. Trent looked at the records, then back at me. You let me believe I earned everything while hiding that you controlled the company. You did earn your promotions, I said. That is why I refused to touch them. You watched me build my career inside your airline. I watched you build your career inside a company whose daily operations were independent from me. You let me think my salary supported our family. You knew I had inherited assets. You knew we signed a premarital agreement. You knew my family controlled aviation holdings. You said you were not involved. I said I was not involved in operations. That was true. You knew what I thought. I held his gaze. I knew you did not ask. I should have spoken more clearly, and I should not have allowed privacy to become misunderstanding. But my failure to correct your assumptions did not make you board that flight. It did not place Alyssa in your suite, approve her travel, or change her work scope after Milo entered the hospital. His attorney objected that the marriage was being introduced into an employment hearing. Judith agreed. Mrs. Ellison's ownership does not prove misconduct by Mr. Ellison, she said. Her decisions as a wife are not before this committee. We corrected the ownership record because Mr. Ellison's retaliation complaint challenged the authority and independence of this process. We will now examine the conduct identified in that process. My ownership testimony was complete, and I had answered every factual question about the 2017 memorandum and the standing recusal. Judith then permitted me to remain as an observer for the evidentiary presentation. For the first time, I was about to learn what the committee had found after the preservation notice. Outside counsel began with evidence that favored Trent. Alyssa's firm had performed legitimate work. Her team developed launch language, reviewed campaign materials, prepared local media guidance, and contributed to the San Diego event. Emails showed that employees considered her capable, and that several of her recommendations had been adopted. This is not a finding that Miss Crane invented her professional role, counsel said. Then the original contract appeared. It authorized preparation work and limited on-site support. It did not classify Alyssa as essential executive travel. It did not include business-class airfare, access to Trent's suite, or authority to act as his personal launch coordinator. The vendor bid certification followed. Alyssa had signed it 3 months before the flight. It required disclosure of any romantic or intimate relationship with a Blue Haven executive who could influence procurement, contract scope, travel approval, or vendor selection. No disclosure had been filed. Trent's attorney argued that the relationship became personal only after the certification. Outside counsel identified a message thread preserved from Trent's Blue Haven-issued phone and independently produced by Alyssa. It showed intimacy before the final travel authorization and before Trent approved the suite arrangement. The next documents were the airfare exception and hotel authorization. Both had been approved through Trent's executive credentials. Alyssa's business class seat and access to his suite were charged to the launch budget. Trent spoke before his attorney could stop him. The event required constant coordination. She was working beyond the written scope. Outside counsel displayed the amendment submitted after Milo entered the hospital. Alyssa's responsibilities had been expanded retroactively to cover executive coordination, stakeholder meetings, and essential travel support. The work had already changed, Trent said. The paperwork was behind. Then came the process record I had not been allowed to see. Travel Compliance requested support for the amendment. Renee Foster, the analyst assigned to the exception, asked for contemporaneous emails, meeting invitations, work products, or approvals proving Alyssa had performed the new duties before the flight. Trent sent a work summary. Renee declined to certify it because several listed meetings did not appear on the approved schedule, and some deliverables had been created after the preservation notice. Outside counsel showed the timestamps without revealing private medical information. The original scope existed before the airport. The travel benefits were approved before boarding. The expanded duties appeared after Milo had been admitted. The work summary was revised again after compliance questioned the amendment. Trent argued that launch work moved too quickly for formal documentation. He said executives routinely exercised discretion when vendors contributed beyond contract language. He accused the committee of converting ordinary flexibility into misconduct because the controlling owner was an angry spouse. Judith answered by presenting the procedural record. My preservation request had covered existing materials only. I had disclosed the affair and my conflict immediately. I had asked for no suspension or termination. When I briefly asked whether repayment could resolve the issue, compliance refused. After Trent filed his retaliation complaint, the disinterested board created the committee he had requested. From that point forward, I received no witness statements, no evidence summaries, and no access to deliberations. Trent's own complaint had expanded the independence of the process. You asked for an investigation protected from Mrs. Ellison's influence, Judith said. That is the investigation you received. Outside counsel placed 2 final documents side by side. The first was Trent's post-hospital work summary request. The second was Renee's written refusal to certify a history she could not support. Judith looked directly at my husband. Why did the trip require a new history after your son was already home? Trent looked at the 2 documents Judith had placed before him. One showed the expanded work description submitted after the preservation notice. The other showed Renee Foster's refusal to validate it. The launch changed in real time, he said. Alyssa performed duties beyond the original contract. Renee treated an urgent commercial decision like a routine expense report. Judith folded her hands. Then explain why the proposed effective date came before the request. Because the work had already happened. Outside counsel asked Renee to join the session by secure video. Until that moment, I had known only that a compliance employee had refused to support part of Trent's revised account. I had never seen her statement or heard her describe what happened. Renee appeared in a small office with a plain wall behind her. She confirmed her name, title, and responsibility. She did not evaluate branding strategy or decide whether Alyssa's work was valuable. Her job was limited to determining whether travel classifications and related expenses were supported by approved documents. She said Trent contacted her after the preservation notice and supplied an expanded description of Alyssa's duties. The timestamps showed that his first requests reached her on Tuesday and Wednesday, before the Saturday conversation in which he promised me he would not contact anyone handling the records. He asked her to use the description as support for the business class ticket, the executive suite access, and the essential consultant designation. Renee requested the original approval, meeting invitations, contemporaneous emails, and work products showing those duties existed before the trip. Trent provided some legitimate launch materials, but they supported Alyssa's original role, not every task added later. When I said the record was insufficient, Renee told the committee, Mr. Ellison asked me to be commercially practical. Trent leaned toward the microphone. I asked you to recognize how executive work actually happens. You asked me to validate a travel classification using a description created after the travel occurred. I did not ask you to lie. You asked me to certify support I could not verify. His attorney objected to the wording, but the time-stamped messages were already on the screen. Trent had not threatened Renee or offered her money. He had done something more familiar. He had treated her professional boundary as an obstacle she should move because his judgment mattered more than hers. Outside counsel then summarized Alyssa's interview. She admitted the relationship with Trent had become intimate before the San Diego flight. She had performed real branding work and attended legitimate meetings, but she had not completed every duty listed in the amended scope. Trent told her he had authority to approve the travel, and that the paperwork would be adjusted. Alyssa also admitted she had signed a vendor certification requiring disclosure of a romantic relationship with an executive who could influence her firm's contract. She did not disclose it. Her statement did not make her innocent. It also did not turn her into the architect of everything that followed. Trent had held the executive authority. Trent had approved the benefits. Trent had decided that a real professional relationship could absorb a private one if the documents were broad enough. When the summary ended, Trent looked at me instead of the committee. You created this, he said. Judith warned him to direct his response to the findings. He ignored her. You let me build a career without telling me whether any success was real. Every director knew who you were. Every promotion happened inside a company you controlled. The records show Mrs. Ellison did not participate, Judith said. That does not mean people forgot whose husband I was. You requested an independent review of that question, she replied. The recruitment and promotion records found no intervention by Mrs. Ellison. Trent's voice rose. She still watched me believe I was supporting our family, while she controlled $12 billion. I had expected anger about the investigation. I had not expected him to reveal so clearly what mattered most. Milo had asked why his father did not believe him. Trent had never asked what that question did to our son. He was still asking whether his status had been real. Judith gave me permission to respond. I did not list the affair, the canceled Saturdays, or every time Trent praised Milo for being easy. None of that belonged in the employment finding. This committee will decide your work, I said. I will not. Trent stared at me. Our marriage ended at the airport. A medical professional told you Milo's oxygen was low, his fever was dangerous, and he needed an ambulance. He asked you to come with him, and you boarded anyway. No finding in this room can change that choice. You hid who you were. I hid nothing that gave you permission to abandon our son. His attorney tried to interrupt, but I continued. I should have corrected your assumptions about my authority. That was a failure of communication inside our marriage. It was not a conflict in your employment, because I built protections against exactly that conflict. Those protections are now preventing me from deciding what happens to you. Judith asked whether I reaffirmed the standing recusal. Yes. I confirmed that I would leave before deliberations, contact no director, request no early notice, and receive the result only through the same formal process that applied to Trent. Then, I closed my folder. I walked out without knowing whether my husband would be warned, suspended, or terminated. Trent followed me into the private corridor before his attorney called him back. "Did you always plan to reveal this after you caught me?" he asked. "I planned never to use ownership inside our marriage." "Then why now?" "Because you challenged the authority of an investigation and made the truth about that authority necessary. Continuing to hide it would have damaged the company and the independence I spent years protecting. You could have protected me. I did. For years I protected your right to earn your own career. I will not protect you from what you did with it." I left before the committee began its private session. The result came 4 days later, after Trent had been formally notified. Under the authority delegated by the disinterested board, the special committee found that he had failed to disclose a conflict of interest, misused executive travel authority, attempted to alter supporting records retroactively, pressured a compliance employee to validate unsupported coding, and made materially misleading statements during the review. Human Resources and the chief executive were directed to terminate his employment under his executive agreement. He was required to reimburse the improper airfare and hotel benefits. His professional licenses did not disappear. No order barred him from working in aviation again. He lost his position because the committee concluded that Blue Haven could no longer trust him with executive discretion. Crane and Field was removed from the procurement process. Alyssa repaid the travel benefits attributed to her. Blue Haven released no statement about the affair and did not turn her private life into public punishment. The company announced only that an executive had departed following an internal governance review. Our family process remained separate. The dissolution case my attorney had filed moved forward in Cook County. Trent retained his own counsel. We agreed to use a neutral, child-focused professional while Milo continued therapy. The temporary parenting agreement provided scheduled calls and short daytime visits. Milo was never asked to choose between us, and his comfort helped determine pacing without making him responsible for legal decisions. Trent apologized during one visit. He sat across from Milo at a low table and said, "I was wrong to get on the plane. You needed me, and I left." Milo listened while turning a wooden block in his hands. "Okay," he said. He did not hug Trent or forgive him on command. He also did not reject him. He returned to building, leaving his father to understand that one correct sentence was a beginning, not a repair. The consequences reached me too. Once my ownership became known inside senior leadership, employees began asking whether Blue Haven had protected Trent for too long. Some wondered whether my recusal had created distance without enough transparency. I commissioned an independent review of executive conflict procedures, including my own decisions. I did not ask the reviewers to confirm that I had done everything right. I asked them to identify what should have been clearer before a crisis forced clarity on everyone. In January, Milo's therapist placed the 3 circles on the table again. She held up a card showing a child with a small bandage. "What should adults do when you say something hurts?" she asked. Milo placed the card inside the smallest circle. "Listen when it's still little," he said. That was when I understood the final part of our story could not be about Trent losing his position. It had to be about whether Milo could learn to live as though his pain deserved belief before it became an emergency. By February, Milo could run across the preschool playground without stopping to catch his breath. His cough had faded, his appetite had returned, and Dr. Priya said his lungs sounded clear. She did not order another chest image because his recovery no longer gave her a reason to expose him to one. Physically, he was becoming an ordinary 5-year-old again. Emotionally, recovery moved in smaller and less predictable steps. Milo still checked adult faces before reporting discomfort, and sometimes asked whether a plan would be canceled if he felt sick. In therapy, he could sort pain into the 3 circles more easily than he could speak about it in real life. I stopped praising him for being brave when what I meant was quiet. Instead, I thanked him whenever he told me. The difference sounded small. To Milo, it was not. Trent's visits remained brief and structured. We met at a family center with a child specialist nearby. not because a court had declared him dangerous, but because both attorneys agreed that Milo needed a setting where no adult could turn his feelings into evidence. During one visit, Trent brought a box of wooden blocks, identical to the set at our house. Milo built a short tower, while Trent followed his instructions. "No red on top," Milo said. "Why not?" "It falls." Trent moved the red block lower without arguing. For 20 minutes they played easily. Milo laughed when Trent made a plastic dinosaur knock over the tower. He asked whether Trent still lived near the tall office building, and whether his apartment had a bathtub. Trent answered every question without mentioning the investigation, Blue Haven or me. When the visit ended, Milo hugged him. In the car afterward, he became quiet. I did not ask whether he had enjoyed himself. I did not ask whether he wanted another visit. Those questions could make pleasure feel like betrayal, and silence feel like a decision. I asked only whether he wanted music. He nodded. Healing did not mean restoring the family we had been. Milo could miss his father and still be afraid of needing him. Trent could behave well for 1 hour and still have years of choices to answer for. I stopped searching for one emotion that would simplify all the others. Trent found temporary consulting work with a regional transportation firm in March. Blue Haven had not blacklisted him, and no secret industry agreement prevented anyone from hiring him. His departure from the airline was known, but the private details remained private. He continued counseling and complied with the temporary parenting agreement. Some weeks he asked for more time with Milo. Other weeks he accepted the schedule without protest. I measured progress by what he did consistently, not by how sincerely he described himself. Our dissolution case continued through ordinary Cook County procedures. The premarital agreement protected the Kendall trust interest and voting block, while the house, joint accounts, and other marital assets were handled normally. I did not use the airline to pressure Trent on property or parenting, because combining those tracks would have turned power into punishment. That restraint no longer required me to disappear. I resumed active responsibilities as Kendall Aviation Holdings' appointing shareholder. I did not become Blue Haven's chief executive or begin appearing in daily operational meetings. Qualified executives continued running the airline. My role was governance. I chaired a limited reform project that reviewed executive conflicts, vendor travel, employee protection, and emergency caregiver policies. The independent review concluded that my standing recusal had been appropriate and effective. It also concluded that ethical restraint could fail when controlling owners relied on private family assumptions instead of clear written communication. I accepted that finding. I had kept my authority separate from Trent's career, but I had also allowed him to misunderstand the structure because correcting him felt uncomfortable. The misunderstanding did not cause his misconduct. It did show me that silence was not always neutrality. Blue Haven adopted clearer relationship disclosures for executives and vendors. Travel upgrades for outside consultants required independent approval. Employees who refused to alter compliance records received stronger protection. Caregiver emergency protocols were revised so an employee could leave a critical event without being forced to invent a professional excuse. None of the reforms carried Milo's name. His illness was not used in training materials, public statements, or internal celebrations. The company did not need his medical history to understand that honesty should not become a career risk. By June, Milo was preparing for a summer day camp held at his preschool. He had chosen a backpack covered with orange dinosaurs and insisted on packing 3 crayons, even though the camp provided art supplies. The morning of his first day, I was scheduled to lead a governance meeting about 2 new independent director appointments. The materials were open on the kitchen table while I checked the time and reminded Milo to finish his toast. He stood beside his backpack with one shoe on. "Mom?" I looked up. "What is it?" He rubbed the front of his neck. "My throat hurts." There was no cough, no flushed face, and no weakness in his legs. He had eaten half his breakfast and argued about his socks 10 minutes earlier. 8 months earlier, I might have asked whether he was sure. I might have checked the meeting time before checking him. I might have praised him for still getting dressed. I closed the folder. "Come sit with me." Milo climbed onto the chair beside mine. I checked his temperature, asked whether swallowing hurt, and gave him water. His temperature was normal. His breathing was easy. "Is it a small hurt, a medium hurt, or a big hurt?" I asked. He considered it. "Small. Thank you for telling me while it is small." He watched my face, waiting for the consequence. "Am I still going to camp?" "Not until we know what your body needs." "Are you mad?" "No." "Do you have work?" "Yes, but work can adjust." I called the pediatrician. The nurse asked several questions and offered an appointment later that morning. There was no urgency, but she advised keeping him home until he was examined. I sent one message to my deputy. "Milo is unwell. Please chair the meeting using the approved agenda. Call only if the board cannot proceed without a required vote." The system did not collapse because I stepped away. The directors had the materials. My deputy had authority. The meeting began without anyone inventing a reason for my absence or treating care as professional failure. Milo sat at the counter while I repacked his backpack. He removed the crayons and placed them in a drawer. "Maybe tomorrow," he said. "Maybe tomorrow." He did not promise to stay quiet. He did not apologize for changing the day. He did not ask whether his throat hurt enough to deserve the doctor. At the clinic, the pediatrician found mild irritation and the beginning of a common virus. There was no pneumonia, no dangerous fever, and no reason for fear. Rest, fluids, and observation were enough. The result was almost unimportant. Trust had existed before the examination confirmed anything. That afternoon, Milo slept on the couch while the governance meeting finished without me. My deputy sent a short note saying the board had completed the agenda and postponed one non-essential item. I read it once, then placed my phone face down. When Milo woke, he asked for ice water and told me his throat still hurt a little. I believed him before the fever rose. That was how I knew he was beginning to trust the world again.